There are two basic stitches to learn when you start out in knitting, the knit stitch and the purl stitch. In this video, I'm going to go over how to do the purl stitch. Hi Sugar Snaps, my name is Brittany. Welcome to the Textile Indie YouTube channel. Here we cover all things fibercraft and textile arts. Right now I'm in the middle of a knitting series going over the very foundational steps you need to know to get started in knitting. To see a tutorial on how to complete knit stitch, check the eye up here and the description below. I have a video on how to do that. I'm going to be doing purl stitch in a chunky yarn and then in a worsted weight yarn so that you can see more clearly on the chunky weight and see what the purl stitch looks most commonly in worsted weight. I'm also going to show you two different throwing methods. One is the English style, which is throwing with your right hand, and then the continental style, which is throwing with your left hand. Throwing is where you're wrapping the yarn around the needle to create a loop on the needle with which to make a stitch. You can learn one of these methods, whichever one feels most comfortable to you, and stick with that. And maybe in the future, if you feel so inclined, you could come back and learn how to do the other method. For the chunky yarn, I'm using size 13 US knitting needles, and for the worsted weight wool yarn, I'm using size US 8 knitting needles. So starting out with the chunky yarn, I'm going to pull out a length of the yarn to work with. And you're going to start out with casting on. To cast on stitches, check out this video here and in the description below. I go through 3 different methods to cast on your knitting stitches. So I'm going to load my knitting needle with 10 stitches. So pause this video and go watch the casting on video if you need to learn how to do that. To count your stitches, each of the loops that you've put onto your knitting needle is a single stitch. So I have loaded this up with 10 stitches. Now I'm going to rotate this around so that I can hold it in my left hand. Your loaded needle, or the needle that you're working from, is going to be in your left hand as you knit. And then move the short tail out of your way so you don't accidentally grab it. It's a bummer when you've been knitting along and find out you've used the tail rather than the yarn from your skein. For a purl stitch, you're going to take your right hand needle and bring it from the right to the left on the front loop of this first stitch. You have a loop coming around the knitting needle here, and there's 2 sides. There's the front side and there's the back side, and that's based on how you're holding your knitting needle. So this side is the front, and that's what I'm going to grab with my right hand needle. So I'm grabbing that like so, and now you can bring this yarn. See, I almost did it. Short tail in the front. Get it out of your way. I'm going to bring this yarn around to the front and bring it around, up and around the front knitting needle, and then send the knitting needle, slide it along towards the back, catching the loop we just created and holding that stitch that you've just created while we slide this previous stitch off. So you've just started a new row by sliding this previous stitch off. So again, right hand needle slides through the front of this next stitch, so the right hand needle is sitting on top. Loop the yarn coming from your skein around the front needle, so you're going up and around, and then pull it towards you or down, and then slide the needle towards the back, catching that loop, and then drop this loop that's on the left hand needle so that you create a new stitch and new row. Again, from the front, crisscross your knitting needles, loop your yarn around, draw the yarn through the loop on the left hand needle, and drop the loop off the left hand needle to create your first stitch, or this first row. So it looks like this. Once you've come to that last stitch and you no longer have stitches on your left hand needle, then you're going to flip this needle over so that the needle is now in your left hand and the empty needle is in your right hand. So you're switching hands and flipping which side is in the front so that the yarn coming from your skein is always towards the tip of the needle. So there's that first row. This is the knit side. This is the purl side. And every time you knit a row, the side that you're facing, you're creating one stitch, and the side away from you, you're creating the opposite stitch, because as you knit purl on one side, it's creating knit on the other. So when you're working in just purl stitch, you're creating a garter stitch fabric, which means that you're going to have what looks like a purl stitch on both sides of the fabric. And this ends up being the exact same as if you did knit stitch on both sides of the fabric. So both knit stitch on both sides and purl stitch on both sides create a garter stitch effect. To get more information from me and from Textile Indie, sign up for my email update list. The link to that is in the description below. Add your name and email and you'll receive a twice-a-month email with resources, updates, new content that I have on Textile Indie YouTube channel and the website, and other goodies from the Textile Indie team. Now let's go over the English throwing method. I've been doing that this entire time, but just to go over how that looks once again, you're creating a purl stitch and then you're throwing the yarn. So you're taking the yarn, and I have it looped over my forefinger so that it's pinched between my middle finger and my forefinger, like so. And you're going to bring it around, loop it around, and then pull that loop through and drop that previous stitch. So bring it forward, loop it around, pull through and off. So I'm holding it, I'm keeping a hold of the knitting needle with my pinky and ring finger as I loop around and then pull that through. So my right hand is doing most of the work. My left hand is just rotating the knitting needles as I'm working. You can also let go of the knitting needles and throw your yarn like so. So you're holding the knitting needles in your left hand while you throw with your right hand. And throwing is when you're wrapping the yarn around, like so. So we'll do that one more row in the English method. You're holding it between your forefinger and your middle finger so that you can loop it around and then pull through. Create your stitch, loop it around, and then pull through. And this hold between your middle and forefinger is just to control the amount of tension that you're working with so that you can hold those stitches nice and snug against the knitting needle. Now the continental method is where you're throwing or you're holding the yarn with your left hand. Bring the yarn forward in front of your work and then catch it between your ring and pinky finger behind. Poke your forefinger underneath the yarn so that it's held out away from your knitting or up. And you're going to catch your first stitch like you would normally with your right hand needle in front, and then bring your forefinger around that needle. Pull the yarn down with your forefinger, pull the knitting needle, the right hand knitting needle, through the loop and then drop that stitch. So again, through that front loop, around, pull the yarn down and then yarn through, create a new stitch. Purl stitch, forward, loop around and down and pull through. So what my left hand is doing is holding the yarn out of the way and then looping around, and my forefinger comes down, holds the yarn out of the way so that I can pull the loop through, drop the stitch, and then my forefinger comes up. I grab the stitch, loop it around, pull through, drop stitch. Down, pull through, drop the stitch. So my forefinger is lifting up and then down, up and then down to hold the yarn in place as I go so that it's where I need it to be in order to pull the loops through. So again, on this side, you're going to bring the yarn, pinch the yarn between your fingers, bring it behind your knitting needle, poke your forefinger under so that the yarn is coming in front of your finger and then behind. Catch your first stitch of the row, lift up your finger, loop it around, bring your finger down, tuck down so that you can catch the yarn in between the needles, pull the loop through, drop that stitch. Catch your purl right there, yarn over, pull it down and through. Catch a stitch, lift up, pull down, pull through. For me, the continental style takes a lot of hand muscle that my left hand lacks, so I tire more easily with the continental style. If I did it more consistently, I'd probably build up the muscle strength to do that like I have in my right hand. So for either the right hand or the left hand throwing, you just need practice and to continue building up those fine little muscles in your hands so that knitting becomes more muscle memory and easier. Dive into your knitting adventures. Don't give up. It takes patience and resilience to just keep moving forward, but you have what it takes to create beautiful pieces from yarn and knitting needles. Hit the like button and subscribe. Hit the bell to get notified whenever I put out a new video. Thanks so much for being here. It's a pleasure getting to walk the creative journey with you. Until next time, happy making, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.